Are you familiar with James Tour at all? He's an American synthetic chemist based in Texas. I don't know if you're familiar with him, James Tour.
Mhm.
He's a synthetic chemist who's stepped into Origin of Life to tell
Yeah, I've seen
every.
you give some sort of usually like sort of angry looking sort of
Yes,
explanations.
he's a very loud critic, and he thinks he's famous for saying that we are clueless about abiogenesis. Like he's got very intense rhetoric about it. He's not an Origin of Life researcher himself. He's a synthetic chemist. But I asked him about amyloids, and he said he was going to look into it. I sent him a few papers about it for citations, and then he never responded back to me. Weeks later, somebody asked him about the Amyloid World Hypothesis in like a video that he was doing for an interview. And that's the only time I've ever seen him talk about amyloids. It's like 2 minutes. And I wanted to know if I could show you him talking about it and I could hear your thoughts about it.
Oh,
If you're
good.
comfortable with that, okay, let's begin.
What he does is he says, okay, in amyloids, they don't need to fold. They can fold, they can get into their position naturally. And he argues that you don't need the you can just use a subset. You can just use 10 of the amino acids. You don't need the other 10 amino acids that have functional side chains. Nobody has ever shown that you can get away with just 10 of the amino acids. Plus,
So I'll just pause it right there because there were kind of 2 points that he brought up. I'm confused about him saying amyloids don't fold, because an amyloid is like a secondary structure of like it's an amyloid fold, right? So do you think maybe would it be fair to say that when an amyloid is self-templating and a second amyloid sheet is growing on top of a template, would you say that that is a process of folding, or is that a formation without protein folding?
I mean, a lot of people call an amyloid a misfold. That's
Mhm.
because the protein that has a certain function folds into a different state where it loses the function, and that is associated then with a disease. And I'm not sure whether that he mixes that up because, of course, the peptide folds
Yeah.
into within the amyloid. Um,
I thought it was pretty obvious, like that anything with a secondary structure, it's a protein fold. So it just seems like by definition, an amyloid is a folded protein.
yes, yes, of course.
I'm not sure what he meant. I think he might mean that they are so simple that they don't have to go through as many contortions as you picture something of a
Yeah.
large protein having to go to. So, AlphaFold now can predict these crazy complex things that we couldn't calculate even, or if we tried to calculate them, we needed to dedicate a supercomputer for a couple of years to solve one. Point is, the problem of how a protein adopts its fold is complicated. An amyloid is by definition simpler, and that, I shouldn't say by definition, an amyloid can be very simple by definition, and that's what's attractive to them as a prebiotic entity, because almost any peptide can adopt them and thereby attain many of these functions we're interested in. So saying it folds or doesn't fold is really semantics, which aren't really interesting at this point. It's a question of what he wants to say. I think I don't know what's coming next about what does the fold have to do with it.
Okay, let's hear it.
and
Okay.
he argues that you don't need the you can just use a subset. You can just use 10 of the amino acids. You don't need the other 10 amino acids that have functional side chains. Nobody has ever shown that you can get away with just 10 of the amino acids.
Uh, is this not what your 2016 paper showed, where you can form amyloids using, I think you use what, 7 amino acid residues in that paper?
So I think he might, James Tour is, I think, referring to something else. An amyloid can form from a single amino acid type. You can just take polyvaline and it'll form something like an amyloid. I think what he's referring to is that, and I'm not sure who he's talking about, but someone who's saying that life only needs, not amyloids, but life only needs 10 amino acid types. I guess. I don't know what else he would be referring to. And there, at the time he said this, well, still, life needs all 20. We haven't been able to remove one completely, I think. But protein folds have been shown to require many fewer amino acids than they actually have. And that's there's many people working on this, several many in the field. who are looking at what are the minimal sets of amino acids that can be
Yeah.
functional for proteins. And they've gotten it well below 10 for many complicated folds. When I say complicated, not amyloid folds.
Yeah.
So here he's also kind of trying to make a point, I think, by saying that, well, life is using, all 20, so you need all 20. It's sort of a bit of an absurd argument.
It seems like a presupposition that's unjustifiable to make.
It looks like, I mean, it's sort of like, if you want to, if James Tour is willing to accept that life, wasn't made by God, then it makes sense that it started off simpler and got more complex. And simpler means not all 20 amino acids were important in the beginning. But since he's already, I think, taking a different standpoint, he wants to argue that, well, all 20 seem to be important, so you can't live without them.
With one amino acid type, or 2 or 3, 4 or 7, and Ehud Kassid from Israel showed a dipeptide, which has 2 phenylalanines already forms an amyloid. You can make very short amyloids. I'm not sure about whether he said nobody showed with 10, whether nobody showed live with 10, and I would say that's probably true, right?
But yeah, nobody's done abiogenesis in the lab yet.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or live with 10 amino acids only, I haven't seen either. I'm not sure whether he mixes up here the two, right? Abiogenesis is before life.
Yeah.
And peptide amyloids, of course, can replicate with only a few amino acid types. That's no problem.
Let's continue.
Even if you have those 10, you have to have those polymerizing. The chances of getting them are very, very hard. So you have 10 amino acids, even if you had something that was 50 units long. So then you'd have 10 to the 50th possible combinations to give you it. And then he says, and you don't have to worry about it folding because amyloid doesn't have to fold. Well, the vast majority of enzymes need to be folded. Amyloid is a specific type. And nobody in their right mind looks at this and says, this solves the polymerization problem. It doesn't, because the free energy is positive. And so those don't want to polymerize. They keep going back to starting material. Ahmed, you know something about free energy being an engineer. So when the free energy is positive, it keeps wanting to go back. They hydrolyze, they go to starting material. So this idea that amyloid solves it, this is another naive idea by somebody who understands very little about the science and the chemistry behind this.
Yeah, so you see what I mean about the fiery rhetoric. Do you want to touch anything about what he said about the energetics of polymerization and specifically amyloid's role in that?
Okay, I mean, a peptide, what is usually the case is that you need at least 28 or something like that to 50 or 100 amino acid lengths that it folds. And then you may have tons of different, I mean, you will never find again the same protein anymore because of the complexity of possibilities to make them. And this is very different here. Now we talk about amine peptides that may be 2 to 6, 7, 8, 9 amino acid lengths, makes the combinatorial argument very different ones, and they can replicate themselves if there is activated amino acids around. And of course, if you don't have activated amino acids anymore, they may get hydrolyzed then again over a very long time. I mean, we are out of equilibrium situation is requested for life, and he is talking about equilibrium. At the end, you may have again everything hydrolyzed. I agree, but we are not talking about equilibrium situations here.
I think once again he misses very much the point of what life is. So life is by definition, not by definition, I always say that it's sort of flouting the second law of thermodynamics and thermodynamics in general, right? We're creating systems that shouldn't just be there on their own, but they're not there on their own.
It's Maxwell's demon.
Yeah, so it sounded to me like he was saying that, they claim, I don't know who they is, claim that amyloids solve the problem of peptides bonds not wanting to form because they stabilize them. And well, I say it's true that amyloids have a potentially nice feature in a prebiotic sense, that they slow down the hydrolysis of peptides. That on its own doesn't solve any problem. You need to have something that helps make peptides faster than they're degraded. That's kind of creates some sort of homeostasis where peptides will stick around for a while. And that's what happens in a cell. You have proteins being made, proteins being degraded, but they're there all the time. And you wouldn't argue then they can't be there because they should be being hydrolyzed faster than they're made. It's just we understand the kinetics. There is the problem that you can't take amino acids in water and polymerize them into peptides, and nor can you make amyloids that way. And that's the free energy problem, is that mostly because when you form a peptide bond, you release water. It's hard to do that in the presence of water. So amyloids themselves don't solve that problem, how they're made, but there's so many other solutions to how peptide bonds can be formed, right? So there's wet-dry cycles where the dry-down reaction in the presence of some activating chemicals, or even, people have shown it from years ago with the salt-induced peptide formation with copper and sodium chloride. You have the other activation chemistries, carbonyl sulfide gas, or trimetaphosphate. I mean, there's kind of like a grab bag full of potential chemistries. And I'm not listing all of them because I'm not prepared to list them right now. But the point is, the activation energy, right, that's solved, right? We don't have good enzymes that can right now take a amino acid and polymerize it. That's kind of what we're working on with amyloids. But even enzymes are taking activated forms of amino acids. They're taking an ester, amino acid ester with the tRNA, and adding that to the growing peptide, right? So, and that activation energy came because, or was built because you first had an amino acid anhydride, which was eventually required ATP to make that. So it's sort of like, the energy came from somewhere nature used, where we found scientists have come up with other ways of getting over the activation energy of making a peptide bond in water. Amyloids don't have anything to do with that. Amyloids can help template and direct what amino acids are added to the peptide chain, but they haven't, just like nature hasn't, they haven't yet found a way to make that a favorable reaction without having some sort of activation chemistry.
Yeah, but with these different activation chemistries and these different catalysts that are capable of undergoing this polypeptide bond formation, the key, with the carbonyl sulfide, is that it's a naturally occurring volcanic gas that's prebiotically relevant, right? There are prebiotic catalysts that can catalyze the formation of these polypeptide bonds in aqueous solution. But I think that the point that I was trying to get out, at least that I hope that James Tour knows, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding his argument here, is that amyloids themselves are one of the most stable conformations that polypeptides can adopt. Like the actual energetics and stability, you're not gonna hydrolyze.
Yes, okay, you're right. So something he keeps missing there, and I guess I kind of let it go by because I was trying to focus on if there was any sense to what he was saying. But one thing he got really wrong is that if a peptide gets made by whatever chemistry he wants to talk about, it will have a tendency to want to hydrolyze in water. If it forms an amyloid, that tendency will just be decreased, right? And it's not, you don't ever get rid of it. There's always going to be this equilibrium, and it seems like he might have been missing that point, and that the amyloid is a energetically perhaps more stable form of the amide bond than a peptide alone in water, right?
Yeah.
Because the hydrolysis can be slowed down significantly.
There are prebiotically relevant catalysts that do make this an energetically favorable reaction that doesn't just hydrolyze back to the starting because those amyloid products are so stable, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And your point about correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a vast number of different sequences of amyloids that could accomplish the same catalysis, or the same kind of functionality, right? You don't need to have, this one specific sequence of amino acids is the one that we need, and its probability is only 1 in 2 trillion. But if you have degeneracy with the number of sequences that you need to accomplish this sort of self-replicating function, then it seems to me that, the combinatorics math that he just demonstrated doesn't apply at all.
Yes, and what we find is that about 20% or so of all the sequences known are amyloidogenic.
Yeah, so then 20% of all protein sequences have a high propensity of forming amyloids.
Yeah, if you have like 6 or 7 amino acids or 8, you have
Yes.
a huge amount that is available, is able to make amyloids that are you find in the genomics, the
Hmm.
genome.
I'm not sure if there was more of this. Let me just see if there's any more.
You never solve the free energy problem in making those polymers. They always want to go back. And even when you try to make them with 10 amino acids, nobody's ever shown functionality from these things. And the amyloids aren't just based on 10. So it's a very naive idea. And
Okay, so that was about it. That's the sum total of everything that I could find that James Tour has said to address amyloids. Is there any other thoughts that you wanted to leave our friend James with?
I think when you follow his arguments, then indeed you get never complexity. But
So do you think that his arguments are flawed then, or
I
do you,
mean, I think he makes okay, it may be too strong here, but we are a closed system, and the entropy is out of equilibrium, low, and then you cannot make the arguments he made. If you are in a thermodynamic equilibrium, you can make his arguments, but we are out of equilibrium. And
so
I think
in
then you
this,
can never get complexity and in his argumentation, but we have complexity, right?
yeah, and I think even outside of the context of biology, there have been experiments in like thermal disequilibrium states showing the complexification processes that occur even without any actual life present. So it's prebiotically relevant as well that these disequilibria states it increase complexity.
So he says that there is no polymerization because the single building blocks are more stable. I mean, of course, at the end of the universe in 100 billion years, we are all back in, I don't know what atom type, or even less, because that,
Protons.
I mean, this is not the argument here. We're out of equilibrium. That's
Mhm.
what I think a life definition, part of a life definition, should include.
He takes certain aspects of what has been said or shown in terms of what amyloids can do and doesn't take into other accounts. What we were just talking about a moment ago is that um, amyloids do form spontaneously in mixtures of amino acids. And his argument is, yeah, but the chance of them having any kind of function or that that they would be selected for is, I think that's what he's saying, is that there would just be too many kinds. It would be irrelevant because there's 20, his number was 10 to the 50th. And so he's right if all 10 to the 50th are made. But the argument is that all of them aren't made because some of them are preferred for some reason we don't know. And one of the reasons that I've argued is that they form amyloids, which then start to template their own synthesis. And that doesn't have to be perfect, like you get exactly the same one, but you get ones that are very similar in sequence and they can maybe then attain some function. But in the meantime, they at least can support their own existence. That's the first step towards them perhaps evolving to something else.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry for subjecting you to
Yeah.
James Tour here, but in America, he really does have a large following of people listening to him and thinking that we really are clueless about abiogenesis. I mean, they hosted him at Harvard to do a debate with Lee Cronin on this. So they're giving him actual a platform here. And so I just thought it was important that he's making these claims here
Lee
about
Cronin, yeah, I'm sorry. Lee Cronin, of course, is an expert in complexity, right? They were
assembly
most
theory. Yeah.
most likely fighting exactly on this argument. But actually, it's good to say we have no clue. I think it is good that we are in the beginning phase and naive. And it's good to have an opponent because, as Pope always said, an opponent is also important to have, right? I mean, you're getting back to work and try harder. And that's what we do again, not against RNA, together with the RNA people.
Well, You said that you had not heard many criticisms of Amyloid World Hypothesis, so I'm happy at least I could share with you one of them from not an origin of life researcher, but a synthetic chemist. So he's, he knows his chemistry. So those were his criticisms at least. I'm happy that I could share them with you, although, like you said, his arguments don't really seem to hold up in a disequilibrium system, which is prebiotically relevant for the origin of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for your time, Dr. Riek. I really appreciate having you. Dr. Greenwald, you've been very, very generous, and this was a joy for me to talk about. Please subscribe if you want to see the full interview with both of these scientists, all about the origin of life and the Amyloid World Hypothesis. It's going to be hitting the channel in the next few days, so you're going to want to hit that bell so you can stay notified. See you then.